It has been one of those weeks where it seemed like just about when I was back to center and back to normal, something else would come along that would take me a minute to get my head around and a minute for my heart to react to. So I think right now I will share some prayer concerns that we wanted to share this morning. We weren't quite sure where to share them. Chris Keene, a friend of mine, a classmate of mine, passed away this week. We will have a funeral for him on Tuesday, visitation on Monday. If you knew him, he always had a smile on his face, one of the nicest guys that I ever knew. We will say farewell to him this week. Yesterday, someone came up to me at Walmart of all places and said, "Hey, have you heard the news? Rick Crines was taken to Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis yesterday with a brain bleed." And those words made me react the same way. But this morning, we got a good report that Rick is fine, that he will be fine. I guess still doing some tests. But those words took the breath out of me for a second too. But it sounds like Rick is doing okay. Seemed like there was another prayer concern I was going to share with you. Oh, Madeline Bradaway's hip. She's hurting and needs some prayers there too. So, I know what it was too. Jace Thompson's uncle Gary. This is Dennis Thompson, if you remember him, brother, passed away a couple nights ago as well. So prayers for the Thompson family. Every moment this week, when I thought like, okay, I can breathe normal again, news came and kind of took the wind out of my sails, like it did all of you a minute ago. And that's just sometimes how weeks go, right? That's just sometimes the season that we're living in, with not lots of good news, it seems. But in the midst of that, then there are these moments that kind of turn us around and we're like, well, wait, maybe what I'm witnessing is something beautiful, not tragic. For any of those of you who were at First Christian Church yesterday to celebrate the life of Lexi Poindexter, it was hard and sad, and there were lots of tears. But man, it was also beautiful and powerful too. And that is what it is like to live a life of faith, to live a life here. There are these things side by side that happen, and so I don't ever want us to diminish the hurt people feel and what they're going through, but I also don't ever want to lay down for a Sunday that God is good and there is good news to share. And so we move to this parable today, this parable that's been asking to be preached for a couple of weeks already, that we've postponed once, so we're not going to postpone it twice. That most of us know about this son who seemingly does something out of the ordinary and then wanders off and finds himself in ruin, far away from home. And he thinks, the best thing I can do is go home and just be one of the servants there. But the Father reacts in this very loving and kind and compassionate way. And so we have to wrestle with what that means for us, and we have to wrestle with who we are in that story. And so I invite you to pray with me and prepare yourselves to listen to this story about the prodigal son. Will you bow your heads? Gracious and loving God, we understand that every day that we get is a gift. That every moment that we have here with one another, with the people that we love, with the things you have appointed for us to do, is a blessing. And so, Lord, let us remember that on the days when it's also hard. Let us remember on those days when we would weep or we would cry. We would cry out. But that's okay. But we also need to be living a life that is sharing your joy and your love and your kindness and your compassion with those around us. And that we can do even when we are broken. Lord, we come to a story this morning that we know, and we find ourselves so often in it. So open our ears and open our hearts to hear a word from you this morning. Maybe that we haven't heard. Maybe that we need to hear. Maybe that you have been thinking about us hearing through all the brokenness and pain and hurt that we have endured in the last couple of weeks. Or maybe that you have had on your mind for us to hear through joy, through a great couple of weeks, through everything's fantastic and the sun is shining. Either way, either one. Open our ears and open our hearts to receive a word from you, Lord. And let everything else just fall away. If you would like to join me, I'm going to be in Luke chapter 15. We're going to read the parable of the prodigal son. In the NRSV, it's listed as the parable of the prodigal and his brother, which is notable because the brother is notable. Here's where it starts in the second half of verse 11. Jesus has told a lot of parables in a row about lost things. Just before this, the lost sheep and the lost coin. Then Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. The slave replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has got him back safe and sound.' And the brother became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I've never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about how Jesus liked to use parables. He told these stories that had a very important meaning beneath them. They were not just the story at face value. And so this one isn't either. And scholars have tried to figure out what exactly Jesus meant here. The beauty of a parable is it changes from person to person often. It is notable that Jesus begins by saying this man had two sons. Keep in mind he is speaking to a Jewish audience, and in Jewish faith there are two sons all the time. Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau. Two sons, okay. Usually in those stories, the younger one is the favored one. The younger one is the hero, if you will, of the story. And so Jesus says next, the younger of them said to his father. And then he says something more usual than we think, but a little out of the ordinary. Give me all of my inheritance now. Let me take it and go away. Now, scholars of Jewish life at this time say that this wouldn't have been scandalous, like sometimes we have been taught. That it wouldn't have been a dishonor to his father, as sometimes you have heard it told. That this was not exactly common practice, but not terribly rare either. The young son was ready to strike out on his own. So he asked for his possessions so that he could do that. He asked for all that he would gain when the father passed. The thing that is unusual isn't that he builds up his own estate and builds up his own farm and has his own livestock and servants and it's that he just takes off. It's that he decides the best thing for him is to leave. And I'm sure they imagined what he was doing while he was away. I'm sure you can imagine as well. All they say in Scripture, all Jesus tells us, is that he squandered it. There were many ways then to squander your inheritance. There are many ways now. We find this young son in ruin. We find this young son in a foreign country taking a job that they would give to slaves. He's to feed the pigs. And he's envious of what the pigs get to eat. He's so hungry. He's in such great need. Sometimes when this story gets told, we tell the story like, oh, the young kid came to his senses and he went home to be with his father. That's not what happens here. It's never what happened here. He's hungry and he's dying. And that's the only thing that makes him go home. For it would be better to be one of his father's servants and one of his father's slaves. Because his father took better care than the person he now calls master. Barbara Brown Taylor preached this wonderful sermon when I was a kid about the prodigal son. And she basically said, here we have this young son who's a lot like many of us. The way that he encounters God, the way that he comes home to his father, is because he is in need of grace. A minute ago when Levi was destroying $1 and his son was begging for it, a future banker maybe, accountant, he said this thing, he's like, how many of you could raise your hand and say that somebody ever said something mean to you or about you? I thought, it'd be an interesting exercise. I'm not asking you to do it. And I was thinking about here in a moment, we're going to preach the prodigal son and what it would be like if I said, everybody raise your hand if you've ever squandered an opportunity. I'm not asking, but it'd be an interesting thing to see. Raise your hand if grace is the only thing that ever brought you back into your father's house. Raise your hand if when you listen to this story, you go, oh man, that was me once. I was dying and I was hungry And thank God I found my way back to my Father. That is some of our story. Some of us go as far away as we possibly can from God and from faith and from love. And it's only because that doesn't work that we ever begin the work of coming home. It is certainly not half of the room. Nothing is as easy a break as 50-50, but it's a lot of us. It is a lot of us. We tried a different way. We tried to do it on our own, and it failed. We found that community was important. We found that love was paramount. We found that we needed to be where our Father was. And so maybe you can look at this young son and go, I know what that feels like. To not have it figured out. To not really believe in my heart that I had to go home and repent to my Father. But to know to say those words because I had hunger in my belly for something greater than I had. Maybe you can relate to this young son. There is another son in this story. And the way Barbara Brown Taylor unpacks this in her sermon is that some of us encounter the Father through our obedience. Some of us have a relationship with God because we understand that the rules will flesh out a good life. Some of us have a relationship with God where we try our very best to do everything right. And there are many of you here, certainly not 50-50 split, but many of you here who this is how you have engaged your faith through many years. You have tried over and over and over to do that which is right at every turn. You have tried over and over and over to just do what you know God would have you do in every moment. And we call many of you saints. But the rub here between the elder son and the younger son is the rub that happens within church between the folks that identify with the obedient followers and the folks that identify with those who are in need of grace. The elder son sees the party that's being thrown for his brother and gets angry. He sees the party that's being thrown for his brother who squandered his half of the inheritance. Moreover than that, the party that's being thrown, the calf that was just killed, the robe that's been put on him, the rings that have been placed on his fingers, the servants who are taking care of him, belong to the older brother. And so he doesn't go into the party. He can't be in the same room as this sinner, his brother, as this one who had squandered every opportunity that the Father gave him over and over and over and didn't even show up today because he really repents. It's because he was hungry and dying. Maybe you can identify with this oldest brother because you are one of those who keeps the rules, who always tries to do what is right, and that is noble. But the trap you fall in, just like this elder brother, is you can't see how powerful and beautiful and great the moment is that the little brother comes home. I preached this sermon once that I don't know if it directly got me fired, but it had a hand in it. And it was all about the balance between grace and truth. I said, look, in the Bible, these things go hand in hand. You've heard me use some of this language here, I'm sure. In the Bible, this goes hand in hand. This notion that there is truth and there are right things and there is right living. That's for sure. But then God also offers us this grace for when we mess up. And those two things are important, and those two things inform one another, and those two things need each other. And so here in the younger son and the older son, we have them again. The one son says, I've done everything you've asked. I haven't left. I haven't fallen down on the job. I haven't squandered anything that you offered me. I was out in the fields today like one of your slaves. And I come home and you're throwing a party for my little brother? Doesn't it matter how wrong he's been? The younger son, for his part, arrives to the father broken. He's not expecting to be restored to any previous position. He's not expecting to receive a robe or to have a feast. He's not expecting to get a ring on his finger. All he knows is, this life I tried without you, Father, doesn't work. I'm dying and I'm hungry and I need nourishment, and I knew you at least would take care of me. So the younger brother is inside of a party that he didn't expect or ask for. And the older brother is outside of a party because he doesn't think that the younger brother deserves it. Jesus tells this parable to a group of people who are spending a lot of their time at this stage of Jesus' life talking about what's more important. That Jesus healed that man, or that he did it on the Sabbath and broke the rules. They're having conversations about, well, wait, what's more important here? He's dining with sinners, and he's talking a lot of trash about the religious leaders. Wait, what's more important here? He refuses to take a position against the government, but yet all the things he said are going to start some sort of revolution if we follow them through. What's more important here, Jesus? The grace or the truth that you're unpacking before us? What's more important? Should we understand that we are sinners and we're broken and there's nothing we can do about it? Or should we pay close attention to the fact that you're asking us to be a part of this anyway? Should we pay close attention to the fact that there are these rules we are to follow? Or is there this way of life that we should live that's beyond them? And in the middle of talking about things like a sheep that's lost and how you leave the 99 to go and get the one, or a coin that's lost, he tells the story of these two brothers who just see everything differently. One tries to keep all the rules as a way to make the father happy. The other has broken all of them and is going back to the father to just have a position as a slave. But Jesus has a third character in this story, and the third character is the one that makes all the difference. There's this father who says to the young son, when he wants all of his possessions and half of his wealth and everything that he would get when the father passed, who says to his son, take it, it is yours. Do with it as you will. Much like you were given breath this morning, and that is yours to spend how you will. You can use your words to speak kindness, or you can use your words to speak hate. You can use your energy to do loving things for those around you, or you can use your energy to shut yourself off from all of them. You can use your time to go to meetings that you're dreading. That's Jeff and I's day. Or go to a youth group, which really excites you. That's the other part of my day. That's how I hold this in the balance and I don't lose my mind. Or my hair, which is gone a long time ago. The father says to the son, here, take it. It is yours. Do with it what you will. He doesn't send any servants with him. He doesn't send someone to tail him. He doesn't send a chaperone. He doesn't plead with the son to stay. He says, take it. It is yours. Your possessions, your life, your choices, they are yours, son. Now, I imagine that this father is worried about his son. I imagine that he grieves that he is gone. I imagine that he's thinking the whole time, oh, I hope he's not in a foreign country, and I hope he hasn't squandered all his money, and I hope he's not eating or wishing that he was eating the pods they give pigs and lying in a ditch and dying. And those are all the things that are happening. But he lets his son go. he lets his son go. He says, this life is yours to live how you'd like. Now there's this moment in this passage that has always spoken to me. Even since I was a little kid when I first heard this story. It would be one thing if the son made his way all the way to the father's house and he went and knelt before him and said, hey, Father, I've sinned against you. I've done all these wrong things. But that's not what happens. What Jesus tells us the Father does is he sees him on the horizon and he goes and runs to him. If you needed to know who God is as Jesus sees him, then you look in this story at a father who takes off running at the horizon for the son who has squandered half of everything the father ever had. Who's coming back dirty and ratty with none of the refinements that he left with. He's coming back unclean in every way that is imaginable to a Jewish man. And instead of waiting for him to kneel at his feet, instead of telling him he couldn't come back home, instead of saying, yeah, I will let you be one of the slaves that belong to me instead of my son again, he takes off running to embrace him and hold him. And if you read that passage, he gets to him and embraces him before the son can even say the line he's been preparing as he walked from foreign country home. The people that would have heard this at the time when Jesus first shared this parable would have definitely understood this father is the exceptional one in the story. For we know people who have squandered their lives and need God. And we know people who have worked very hard to keep all the rules and need God. But we don't know too many people who would just give and give and give. And once they've seen their son unclean returning, would run to them. What he does next is even more scandalous. He puts a robe on him and rings on his fingers and kills the fatted calf and throws a party. Jesus is trying to tell those who are hearing that if you're one of those who is squandering your life day by day, if you're one of those who has made yourself unclean and you don't think there's a pathway back to God, God's running to you now, trying to find you now, and he wants to throw a party for you. But then the older son comes home. The one who's kept all of the rules, who's done everything right. And the father has a scandalous love for him too. It's next level righteousness. For he says, son, you've been with me all this time. And all that I have is yours. But he asks his son to do something that's not easy for him. See that your brother was lost and is found. See that your brother is home. We risk putting these two brothers into stereotypes. The fun-loving younger brother who finally learns a lesson versus the sour older brother who's never taken a risk. I'm not sure that's what's happening here, though it makes it easier to understand this passage. But the father has nothing but love for both of his sons. He refuses to choose between his children. All his energy is focused on what? Getting them back together again. It's almost as if a young son who has spent time away, who has squandered many of his opportunities, needs the stability of an older one who has just done the things that were asked of him and the things he was supposed to do his whole life. And it's almost too like an older son who has done all the things that his father ever asked of him needs to understand grace through seeing his brother having squandered so much that was offered to them both. The happy ending that could exist in this story rests solely on the brother's shoulders. You understand? The father is inviting him to a family reunion. A party he's throwing in honor that the younger brother has returned, not in honor of what the younger brother has been doing. He wants his sons to be together, to learn from one another. But where Jesus leaves the story, the elder son is still on the outside of the party looking in. Because he can't get over what he thinks he deserves greater than what he thinks his brother is receiving. He has a choice to make. He'll have to decide between being right and being in relationship with his family, which can sometimes be a gut-wrenching decision. Unless the choice he could make is a third way to redefine righteousness, to abandon the lower righteousness of being right all alone in the yard, for the higher righteousness of embracing the wrongdoer. Not because it makes sense or serves justice or sends a proper message to anyone about facing the consequences of their action, but simply because it is what the Father does. Come on in, the father says to the elder son. Stand here on our side, on the side of human beings, on the side of others. The gospel that Jesus communicates as one of us always trying to find those who are lost and find them. It's one of us always trying to find those who are on the outside looking in and bring them into the party. The gospel that Jesus communicates is one of a giant feast prepared in the midst of famine. And it's prepared there for those who hunger and are dying, and it is prepared for those who have tried every day to do their best. Those who carry an abundance of grace and abundance of truth, for we need each other. I suppose we are afraid of letting people off the hook. That's certainly what is keeping the elder brother outside. I suppose we are resentful of unearned love. Unless we happen to be the ones toward whom the Father is running, with arms wide open and tears wetting his beard. We know this story, and we know it instinctively because at some point in our lives, probably all of us have been both brothers. What Jesus is asking us to do, each of us, all of us, is to be the Father. The Father who can look upon the one who has done wrong and rejoice that they are home. And look upon the one who has done right and encourage them to open up their home to welcome those who are lost. When we when we moved here, my sister loved her life. She was a 7th grade cheerleader and one of the popular kids in her class. Cooper, I'm talking about your mom. Make sure you know I talked about her today, okay? And she was devastated that we were moving. Crushed. She had a really good thing going for her. In Milan, Indiana. Those Milan, Indiana of Hoosier fame. And I remember when we came up to visit Linton, she was pretty salty about the whole thing. And we cruised past the You'll Like Linton sign, and I remember turning around to her and going, "Hey, it says it right here, you'll like Linton." I got a dirty look from the back seat. I was ecstatic to move away from Milan. I know we record these sermons, but I don't think any of them have found them yet. I couldn't wait to leave that town. I actively talked smack about that town the whole time I lived there. The line that made the paper one time is I said, hey, they won a state championship in 1954, and they took glue and sprayed the whole town down so nothing could change. I think that was in the Indianapolis Star. Yeah. My dad was a superintendent. It was a great day for him. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Life has a way of coming full circle, yes? I remember the day that I messaged my sister and said, hey, I think God wants me to go back to Linton to be the pastor at Saron Church. I think that's what's happening now. You know what my sister sent back to me via text? You'll like Linton. We each of us have been the son who squandered every opportunity and didn't live life the way we're supposed to, and gave it all away. And we found our way home under the worst of circumstances. We each of us, too, have been the one that did everything right and stayed where the Father was and understood, I am to be here with the Father to make sure this all goes right. What the church is, the vision of God that Jesus tells, is of a place and of a people and of people who move through the world and understand that both of those sons need a home and both of those sons need the love of a father. And a church could be a place where both of those sons can come to share in a feast. Amen? Whether you're ecstatic about the journey that brought you here or you're mortified by it. Whether it's the thing that you always thought this was building toward, or you are super surprised that there's a day you look and go, I think I'm supposed to go home. The church is the place where we prepare the feast for both sons, for all sons and daughters, for everyone who has in this moment decided where I need to be is near the Father. Jesus told this parable to those folks so they understood what he was about. And in this Lenten season, our mission is to understand Jesus better. So we move now to this table that is in its way a feast. But it's a feast where we remember what it cost for Jesus to show his love to saints and sinners and young sons and old sons and all sons and daughters, regardless of what had befallen them in the season before, in the week before, in the tragedy before. They held once again that cup and that bread. And this table is open to all because God tells us of a Father who loves us all. And even in the hardest weeks, that is good news. Amen.